Welcome to Beyond the Hype, the podcast where we cut through the buzzwords and bold claims to uncover how science really works. I'm Professor Frank Marino, physiologist, researcher, and someone who's spent a career asking hard questions about performance, fatigue, and the human limits. Each episode will dig into the evidence behind the latest trends in sport, health, and wellness. What holds up under scrutiny and what's just hype. So join me as we go beyond the headlines, beyond the fads, and beyond the hype. That sound, you've probably heard it in the locker rooms, on sidelines, or maybe in your home before a run. The stretch and snap of pulling on a pair of compression tights. Athletes love them. Runners, footballers, cyclists, even weekend warriors, all squeezing themselves into sleek sleeves and leggings that promise better performance, faster recovery, and fewer injuries. It's become part of the modern uniform, almost a badge of commitment. But have you ever stopped to wonder why we wear them? What's really going on under that snug fabric? Is there genuine science behind it? Or just another layer of hype wrapped around clever marketing? Like most things in sport, it started with good intentions and a bit of medicine, before morphing into a $1 million industry. And along the way, the line between what helps the body and what just looks the part, well, it got a little blurred. In today's episode of Beyond the Hype, we'll pull back the stretchy layer and ask, do compression garments actually work? Or have we all just been squeezed by the promise of performance? Welcome back to Beyond the Hype. In the last episode, we explored hydration and how myths around sports drinks and dehydration often cloud the real science. Today, we turn our attention to something you've probably seen on playing fields, in gyms, and maybe even on your neighbour's early morning run. Compression garments. Those tight sleeves, socks, and full body suits promise a performance edge, faster times, better recovery, fewer injuries. The question is, do they actually deliver? But here's the hook. Athletes are always searching for that edge, the fraction of a second, the tiniest margin that separates gold from silver. And sport history is full of stories where people thought they'd found it. From altitude tents to copper bracelets to cryotherapy chambers. Compression garments fall into that very same story. They look high-tech, they feel snug, and, importantly, they signal to others that the wearer is serious about performance. But where did they actually come from? The roots of compression garments weren't athletic at all. They started in medicine. In particular, vascular medicine. Doctors used elastic stockings to help patients with varicose veins, deep vein thrombosis, and post-surgical circulation problems. The idea was simple. If you apply external pressure to the legs to help blood return to the heart, you can prevent what we call venous pooling and clots. This is where compression was proven effective, in patients who needed help with venous return. So by the late 20th century, sports scientists and companies began asking, if compression helps patients with poor circulation, could it also benefit healthy athletes by improving blood flow and better oxygen delivery? The leap was made from the hospital ward to the running track. So in the 1990s and early 2000s, companies began producing compression tights, socks, and tops marketed directly to athletes. The claims were bold. Improved performance through reduced muscle vibration, better circulation, faster clearance of waste products, and even lower risk of injury. The marketing was slick, often backed by testimonials from elite athletes. But let's think about it. A sprinter exploding off the blocks, legs encased in sleek black tights, or a marathoner finishing a grueling race, swapping straight into compression socks in the recovery area. The garments became a visual symbol of athletic professionalism, a badge of belonging to the world of performance science. There's also the psychology of fashion and identity. Wearing compression garments wasn't just about what it might do inside the muscle, it was also about what it said on the outside. I'm committed. I'm part of the serious crowd. In some sports, compression garments quickly became as much a statement piece as they were perhaps a practical tool. And of course, once professional athletes were seen wearing them, the trickle-down effect was inevitable. The weekend warriors, recreational runners, and even casual gym goers started buying compression socks and sleeves, often at very significant cost, believing they too could unlock hidden performance gains. This is a familiar story. We've already encountered it in other areas. A medical intervention migrates into sport, gains momentum through marketing and visual appeal, and is soon entrenched as an almost unquestioned part of the athletic landscape. It wasn't just the look and feel of compression garments that caught attention, it was the marketing. Some brands didn't shy away from making grand promises. In particular, one company even used the tagline, "Beyond Reason." Think about that for a second. Beyond reason. That's not exactly a scientific claim. In fact, it's exactly the opposite. It signals that you shouldn't expect rational, evidence-based explanations. Instead, you're supposed to believe in the magic. It's clever advertising because it taps into the psychology of athletes desperate for an edge. If you want to go beyond what's humanly possible, why not try something that claims to be beyond reason? But that phrase also tells us something about how important it might be, and how the strongest selling point is that the product goes beyond reason. Then it probably isn't grounded in physiology, biochemistry, or any of the things that actually make athletes faster, stronger, or even more resilient. Instead, it's selling a feeling, the idea that wearing these garments is enough to take you to the next level. This reminds me of something I spoke about in our very first episode. I'd taken my son into a sports store one weekend, and he was immediately drawn to the compression garments section. To him, these weren't just bits of clothing. They were a signal, a way of saying, I'm an athlete, I'm serious, I'm part of the game. It struck me at the time how powerful that combination of marketing and perception really was. And still is. In fact, the young sales assistant behind the counter was trying to convince me that if my son had the compression garments on, the lactic acid would just wash away. Of course, that's not the case at all. But my son wasn't thinking about recovery markers or physiological strain. He just knew that the athletes he admired wore them, and if he wore them, maybe too he would feel the same. And that's the story of compression garments in a nutshell. They look the part, they feel the part, and when you pull them on, you might even believe they make you the part. But as scientists, we have to step back and ask, is there real evidence to support these claims? Here's the catch. They weren't cheap. For parents of young athletes, that's no small thing. When you add up the cost of boots, uniforms, training fees, travel, and then pile on extras like compression garments, sports drinks, cold water immersion sessions, or even cryotherapy chambers, the expense keeps growing. It becomes a constant bombardment of products, each claiming to be essential for success. And really, if all of these things actually worked as advertised, by now our athletes should be outrunning jets. Of course, that's an exaggeration, but it makes the point. The hype piles up while the actual gains remain marginal at best. As a parent and having done my fair share of coaching, I always listened to the spectators, many of them parents, who would say things like, gee, that kid's really fast. Wow, she can really jump. Or even, he's really strong in that tackle. And although these physical capabilities are important, the real question should be, can he actually kick a ball? Can she actually throw with accuracy? Can they read the game and be in the right place at the right time? You see, the point is that even if compression garments could make your athlete faster, stronger, or jump higher, they cannot in any way improve the skill and quality of being able to read what's happening around them. These are the attributes, if you like, of what makes the exceptional player or athlete. Some of the things probably can't be taught, or at least acquired by wearing a particular piece of clothing. Which brings us back to the central question. When it comes to compression garments, what does the science really say? So, the study of compression garments changed to the very practical question of whether they would help with recovery. If you caught the episode on cold water immersion, the same thing happened. Performance didn't necessarily improve, so let's see if recovery can be assisted and maintain performance for the next day or the next match or the next training session. For all the mammals out there, that is, the middle-aged men in Lycra, listen carefully. One of the classic studies on compression garments and recovery was specifically designed with you in mind. In 2004, a study using 12 trained 63-year-old cyclists completed 2 5-minute maximal bouts separated by about 80 minutes of recovery with and without level 3 compression stockings. In case you're not aware, compression stockings have different levels of pressure on limb and vasculature. In this study, they use compression that is usually for moderate venous edema or swelling. So, wearing stockings in recovery cut the performance drop between bouts to about 2% and also lowered lactate and hematocrit, that being a lower viscosity of the blood. This was an inter-bout recovery win, more than an in-bout boost. For endurance mechanics, others showed with trained runners that compression tights reduced aerobic cost at a pace of around 12 km per hour, but there was no direct time trial performance boost. Now, let's contrast those lab-leaning experiments with what might be regarded as more ecologically valid. In other words, studies where simulation of the real world is attempted. Our own lab studies, directed by Professor Rob Duffield, sought out to see whether there was something to compression garments for team sport trials. In club cricketers, a 30-minute repeated sprint protocol with full-body suits supplied by actual makers of compression garments against controls showed no difference in 10-metre or 20-minute sprint times or throws, but higher skin temperature, lower 24-hour creatine kinase, which is a marker of muscle damage, and lower 24-hour soreness scores in the compression condition. Notably, there were no differences between the brands that they studied. This study showed a little promise, but nothing really for the researchers to say they found the silver bullet. Following this one, under 21 rugby players completed 2 consecutive days of an 80-minute simulated team sports circuit, with garments worn during exercise, plus 15 hours into recovery. There were no differences in the capability to repeat the sprint or in power when using the scrum machine. No changes in heart rate, tympanic temperature, body mass, no lactate or muscle damage enzyme differences, but soreness was lower over 48 hours with the compression garments. They did note that the skin temperature was higher under when wearing the garments. A follow-on sprint and fatigue study reported minimal effects on voluntary performance or the physiology, but reduced soreness at 24 hours with lower body compression garments worn during and after the bout. A pattern started to emerge, certainly from our own studies in our own lab. So, across these early studies, you see method-driven outcomes. A lactate dip after exhaustive cycling, repetitive jump power maintained in volleyball, inter-bout recovery gains in elderly cyclists, running economy tweaks at a single speed. But once you move into match-like, repeat sprint team sport designs, like the studies of Duffield, the go faster needle doesn't move, while perceived recovery or soreness reliably nudges in the right direction. In short, objective performance effects are trivial to small and very inconsistent, whereas the perceptual outcomes, in other words, feeling supported, a bit less sore, a bit more ready, are more likely to budge. But even this doesn't guarantee that your next performance will be better or even maintained. So, if the early data were mostly small effects and softer perceptions of benefit, what about the more recent studies, the ones done with tighter designs and bigger samples? One example is a 2013 study on elite field hockey players. After a simulated match, players wore either compression garments or loose pants for 24 hours. Blood samples were taken over the next 2 days and recovery was tracked. What happened? Players who wore compression said they felt better, recovered, and slightly less sore. But their creatine kinase and C-reactive protein, which are muscle damage and inflammatory responses, and jump performance didn't budge. In other words, the physiology stayed the same, only the perception shifted. Of course, if you haven't realised as yet, it is impossible to conduct a placebo-controlled study on compression garments. At this point, I'm going to take a sidestep and talk briefly about the meaning of placebo, and we'll circle back to how this is problematic for experiments on compression garments, and why, perhaps, beyond reason, is the only way forward it would seem. The word placebo actually has ancient roots. It comes from the Latin phrase placebo domini regione vivorum. I shall please the Lord in the land of the living. That line appears in the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible, in Psalm 116. You see, in medieval times, mourners who attended funerals simply to please the family or to collect food and payment were mockingly called placebos. In other words, these were the people that turned up at the wake in order to get a free feed, and there would be no way to verify whether they actually knew the deceased because the deceased was deceased. From there, the word came to mean something done merely to please rather than to help. By the 18th century, medicine had borrowed it. Doctors began referring to sugar pills or harmless tonics as placebos, remedies given more to please than to benefit. And in 1955, American anesthesiologist Henry Beecher published his landmark paper, The Powerful Placebo, showing that patient belief alone could produce genuine physiological changes in pain, heart rate, and even hormone levels. Today, when we talk about placebo effect, we mean the improvement that comes from expectation and belief, not from the treatment's active ingredient. It's the mind convincing the body that something helpful is happening. And remarkably, the body often cooperates. To test whether a treatment's effect is real or just placebo, researchers use something known as blinding. So, in a single blind experiment or trial, participants don't know whether they're getting the real treatment or a dummy one. In a double-blind trial, neither the participants nor the researchers who interact with them know, which prevents unconscious bias on both sides. It's the gold standard for drug and supplement studies, where you can make two pills look and taste identical. But here's the catch. You can't really do that with compression garments. There's no way to make someone think they're wearing compression when they're not. They can feel it instantly. The physical sensation itself becomes part of the psychological experience. So even if a garment does nothing physiological, the belief that it supports, stabilizes, or aids recovery can genuinely change perception of effort and soreness. That's the heart of the placebo effect in sport. It doesn't mean athletes are imagining things. It means the mind and body are working together in a complex feedback loop where expectation shapes performance. The garment may not change blood flow, but if it changes confidence, readiness, or perceived exertion, it can still influence behaviour. And that's why compression garments sit in an interesting grey zone. Not pure physiology, not pure psychology, but somewhere in between. In simplistic terms, experiments using compression garments are tricky because there is no way to get your participants to not know what they are wearing, so there will always most likely be some kind of bias. In 2016, a study looked at a different angle, and that was downhill running, which causes muscle damage through what's known as eccentric skeletal muscle contractions. Runners wore lower body compression tights during and after this session. What were the results? A very small improvement in jump recovery after the muscle damaging run, but no real differences in soreness, blood markers, or running economy. Again, we see the pattern. Maybe a slight benefit when muscles are pushed to their limits, but nothing like the transformative edge promised by the marketing. The great thing about the passage of time, and it speaks to why science is slow, is that we have to wait to accumulate data and evidence to begin to think about making decisions. So after about 20 years of sporadic research, we now are able to use retrospective analysis. So when researchers began pulling these newer studies together, the pattern didn't shift that much at all. In a major 2021 review in the journal Sports Medicine, it summed up decades of data and concluded that benefits were mixed. Compression garments consistently made athletes feel better, but objective performance outcomes remained, well, let's just say inconsistent. Earlier meta-analyses, like those in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2014 and again in 2017, found small but consistent reductions in muscle soreness and modest help for strength or power recovery after heavy eccentric exercise. But again, biochemical markers of muscle damage were all over the place. If we fast forward to the latest running specific analysis published in 2024 and this year, 2025, the verdict is even clearer. When researchers pulled dozens of treadmill and road studies comparing compression socks or tights with standard gear, they found no benefit for performance, physiology, or even perceived exertion. The overall evidence quality was rated low to moderate, meaning small effects can't be ruled out, but the direction of evidence doesn't point to a genuine advantage. That said, not every review is a conservative one. In 2023, analysis of 42 studies found statistically significant improvements in speed, endurance, and motor performance, but the authors themselves caution that these were very small effects. The data were highly variable and the results depended heavily on which outcomes were included. It's a reminder that when you change what you pull, you can change the conclusion. So where does this leave us? Compression garments are not a performance enhancer in the true physiology sense. They don't make you faster, stronger, or more efficient, at least not in a measurable way. What they do seem to offer is a psychological and perceptual edge. Athletes often feel better, recover a little more comfortably, and perhaps gain confidence from the ritual of wearing them. And sometimes that feeling alone is enough to help an athlete prepare or push a little harder. Not because the garment changes the body, but because it changes the mindset. So, let's do a summary of the myth and reality check. Myth 1. Compression garments make you faster. This is the big one, and it's the easiest one to test. Decades of studies, from lab-based sprint protocols to field simulations, tell the same story. No measurable improvement in speed or power. Your body's ability to produce force, sustain pace, or maintain oxygen delivery isn't enhanced by squeezing it tighter. Any boost people report is psychological, not physiological. The reality, you might feel more stable already, but the stopwatch does not lie. Myth 2. Compression speeds up recovery through better circulation. Sounds plausible. Tighter muscles mean better blood flow, faster waste removal, but not quite. While medical grade compression garments and socks and stockings can help patients with venous issues, the pressures used in sports garments are far lower, typically 15 to 25 millimeters of mercury compared to almost double that in clinical stockings. That's nowhere near enough to change muscle perfusion or metabolite clearance in healthy athletes. The reality then is, the improved recovery people report is more about perception and ritual, a signal that the brain that recovery has started rather than a measurable physiological effect. Myth 3. Compression reduces injury risk. Again, appealing in theory. Stabilize the muscle, reduce oscillation, prevent damage, but studies using electromyography signals and high-speed motion capture show that any reduction in muscle vibration is so small and it doesn't translate to fewer strains or pulls or injuries. The reality then is, good warm-ups, progressive loading and sensible recovery are what prevent injury, not a pair of tight tights. Myth 4. Compression helps regulate temperature. In fact, the opposite can happen. Multiple studies, including Duffield's rugby and cricket trials, show that skin temperature is higher under compression garments with no added cardiovascular strain, but definitely no cooling benefit. The reality? Compression may make you feel sleek, but it's not a substitute for thermoregulation. In the heat, it can even be counterproductive. Myth 5. Compression is essential for serious athletes. This is where the marketing has done its cleverest work. Walk into a sports store and the message is clear. If you're serious, you wear compression. But between the cost, the hype, and the flood of other must-haves, sports drinks, cold water immersion, massage guns, cryotherapy, the expense adds up quickly, especially for parents of young athletes. The reality? There's nothing essential about it. At best, it's a comfort tool, a way to feel ready, supported, and part of the athletic ritual. At worst, well, it's an unnecessary cost driven by clever advertising. And maybe that's the deeper story here. Sport has always lived at the edge between belief and biology. Athletes are driven to find any advantage, a new drink, a new routine, a new piece of kit, anything that might make the difference between ordinary and exceptional. The placebo effect reminds us that belief itself can be powerful. It can change how we move, how we feel, and even how we endure discomfort. But it also reminds us to stay honest about what's real and what's imagined. When every new product promises a faster recovery or a stronger performance, it's easy to forget that the real edge doesn't come from what we buy. It comes from what we do, day after day in training, rest, and preparation. So, if you like the way compression garments feel, wear them. If they help you focus or get into the right headspace, that's fine. But just remember, it's not the fabric that makes the athlete. It's the mindset, the work, and the willingness to push when it counts. After all that, what can we say about compression garments? The evidence is clear enough. They won't make you faster, stronger, or more efficient. They don't change blood flow in any meaningful way, and they certainly don't turn recovery into a science fiction reboot. What they can do is make you feel ready, supported, confident, and maybe a little more in control. That's the power of perception. It's not fake, it's actually human. Our brains are constantly negotiating between what we expect and what we experience. Sometimes that belief helps us, sometimes it blinds us. In the case of compression garments, it's a reminder that the most powerful performance enhancer of all might still be sitting between our ears. You've been listening to Beyond the Hype, where we peel back the science and the marketing to find what really matters in human performance. In the next episode, we're heading into murkier waters, the world of metabolism. Before we can tackle the even muddier subjects of diet, exercise, and weight management, we'll need to strip metabolism back to its basics. What it actually is, how your body turns food into energy, and why so much of what you hear about speeding it up or hacking it is pure fiction. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time as we go beyond the hype.